Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning and welcome to All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist in for Phil Sanchez. The federal budget bill has big changes in it for Hoosiers on Medicaid. The Congressional Budget Office estimates Indiana would lose 15% of its Medicaid funding over the next 10 years. Able-bodied adults without dependents would have to work, volunteer, or be enrolled in school for at least 20 hours per week. There'll also be a new copay of up to $35 on adults with incomes between 100 and 138% of the federal poverty line. There are exceptions for services such as primary care and mental health care. In addition, people who got coverage under the Affordable Care Act expansion would be subject to redetermination checks every 6 months. Senator Todd Young says the One Big Beautiful Bill Act will deliver the largest tax cut in history for working and middle-class Hoosiers, expand the child tax credit, spur new economic growth and job creation, and advance President Trump's agenda. He also praised its investments in the military and in research and development. Senator Jim Banks says, "I'm proud to support the biggest tax cut for working families in American history. This bill delivers on President Trump's promise to secure the border and strengthen our military while also making the largest spending cut ever. I'll keep standing with President Trump in the Senate to get results for hardworking families in Indiana." Meanwhile, Democrats here in Indiana say the bill's Medicaid provisions could leave thousands of Hoosiers without Medicaid coverage. They also say could close rural hospitals. I sat down with State Representative Carrie Hamilton to discuss her concerns. Let's bring in State Representative Carrie Hamilton. Representative, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Garrett. Glad to be here.
Out of everything in the federal budget bill, what do you believe is the most impactful specifically to people living here in Indiana?
Well, I think it's really important to say, first off, that it's a $3.3 trillion cost. So this is probably, I've seen estimates that it may be the most expensive bill that Congress has passed, if they pass it, in about 60 years. That's alarming. That should be alarming to all Hoosiers. But when we think about Indiana in this federal budget, we also need to know that Indiana is the third most reliant state on federal support. So we know this is going to cause pain for Indiana. A recent estimate showed 230,000 Hoosiers will lose their access to health care. And that also translates to maybe a dozen hospitals closing across the state. So we have that direct impact on 230,000 Hoosiers and their families with lack of access to health care, hospitals closing, and the fall-on negative effects that has for those communities and anyone that uses that healthcare service in those communities. So that's probably the biggest blow of a few that we're going to see here in Indiana.
Now, many of the people who use Medicaid and SNAP already work, and quite a few are full-time caregivers for people with serious disabilities. Those are both exemptions in Indiana's new work requirements. Are those people's fears about losing their benefits overblown? They already, at least on paper, meet those exemptions.
Well, the challenge is this bill is creating a whole new bureaucracy when the Indiana Republicans have shown they support with the new state budget doing similar requirements. So we're creating paperwork for folks to prove their eligibility. And as other states have rolled this out, including Georgia, for example, they've shown that people who are eligible, who are working and are eligible, have a hard time proving their eligibility because the system is so complex. So we understand that many people will lose health care who are eligible simply because we're spending all of this money to create a bureaucracy that they can't navigate. It's really designed to fail them.
Democrats, in a lot of their criticisms of the cuts to Medicaid, say that they will actually lead to increased health care costs to the state. Can you explain exactly how that would work and how specifically that would end up landing in the taxpayer's lap?
Yeah, there are a variety of ways. I'll point to, so if we think of 12 hospitals closing, that means there's more pressure on other service providers in neighboring areas, more pressure on our emergency rooms when people lose health care. All of that means the system becomes more expensive and bogged down. This is really a big concern for Indiana, and certainly losing the reimbursement rates for health care for 230,000 Hoosiers, reimbursements that go to support those rural hospitals in particular, is just a massive drain and cost to our state.
Explain the impact that this federal budget is going to have on the state legislature's policy-making decisions when you reconvene in January. And for that matter, how would it affect some of the things that the legislature already passed during this session?
Well, so let's talk about, we've talked about health care. So there's clearly, if we're losing 230,000 Hoosiers support from the federal government, we as a state have to decide if we're going to try to backstop that or not. My sense is my Republican colleagues across the aisle are not interested in doing that. We also have a massive hit to food stamps. We've seen Indiana's food banks raise up alarm bells across the state as a network of food banks because they're not going to be able to fill the gap. So we're going to have, folks and communities in every corner of our state not have access to food. These repercussions will impact our state and its operations in ways we can't yet anticipate. I do believe there's going to be more pain for Hoosiers, and that I'm not convinced that, based on what we've just seen in the most recent legislative session, that when we come back, we'll be willing, that the majority party will be willing to help relieve pressure on Hoosiers and ultimately on our economy that we're going to see from this big budget-busting bill.
What else in the federal budget bill are you concerned about?
I'm also disappointed in the attacks on new manufacturing and clean energy manufacturing support. So we've seen in Indiana a huge benefit from new manufacturing sites coming online as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. This bill is proposed to cost us about 5,000 jobs in the clean energy sector. And one particular example that I can point to is in southern Indiana. So about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, it was announced that a Canadian company was going to spend $800 million to build a new solar manufacturing plant in southern Indiana. That plant is far along in construction, and now because of this bill, this federal bill, they may not be able to open their doors. That has significant economic repercussions for southern Indiana. And also just for the ability to create new, clean, cost-effective, really inexpensive energy in our state.
Councils. Indiana's own state-level Medicaid changes are now in effect. You now have to work, volunteer, or take part in a work program for at least 20 hours per week. There are exceptions for people who are medically certified as physically or mentally unfit for employment. You're also exempt if you're pregnant or have a child under age 16, or if you're caring for someone with a serious medical condition or disability. People receiving unemployment benefits also are exempt. Coming up, families who use Medicaid fear the new work requirements might jeopardize their coverage. I'll bring you one man's story next. Welcome back. A Greenfield man who has muscular dystrophy tells me changes to Medicaid eligibility rules likely would kill him. His medications and equipment cost thousands of dollars, and his mother has to provide round-the-clock care. Jonah Jacobs tells me the Family and Social Services Administration already has taken months to review whether it will cover his medical equipment. Now he and his mother say they're afraid they're about to lose it all.
Why? It's a piece of plastic. It is what it is.
Jonah just found out how much this broken mud flap from his wheelchair will cost. More than $1,300.
These are batteries. You can hear it back there. Those are his batteries. Any water that gets in there will completely fry this wheelchair.
Jonah's used a wheelchair since he was 16. He's 24 now.
I require 24/7 assistance from people. I have to make sure I take my medicine, because if I don't remember to take certain medicines, it can kill me. I have to do extra steps to do basic things like use the bathroom, go eat.
That requires very specialized and very expensive equipment. This lift costs $5,000.
I need this to get in and out of bed, on and off the toilet, back in and back out of my wheelchair, to even go to the floor if I need to stretch out and stuff. And it is falling apart.
But he's been waiting since December to find out whether they'll cover it, or a new wheelchair, or even his ongoing physical therapy or medications. Jonah's mother, Pam, cares for him around the clock.
It costs a lot less for me to take care of my son than sending him away. A whole lot less. and he's happier and more stable and gets the best care he can get.
Pam says their only sources of income are Medicaid and whatever she can make by selling homemade crafts. Indiana's new Medicaid work requirements include an exemption for parents providing for a person with a serious medical condition or disability. But Pam worries she'll lose access anyway. She says the FSSA is very slow to respond to her follow-ups.
We don't know if we're going to pay rent next month. We don't know if I'm going to pay the phone bill, when it's due again. We don't know any of that. Because once it stops, it's going to take everything.
ARC of Indiana's Kim Dodson says she's fielding more and more calls from worried families like Jonah's. Her organization advocates for people with disabilities.
A delay is very common that we're seeing right now for people, and it's really putting forward a lot of anxiety to people who are just trying to live their lives.
Dodson says the mandatory 5% spending cuts at all state agencies mean the FSSA might not have enough caseworkers to review cases like Jonah's.
I think we are, potentially going down a path where that's going to become harder and harder, and that could potentially lead to institutionalization for people with disabilities.
The FSSA tells me the work requirements in SEA 2 have not gone into effect, and Medicaid determination would be based on the requirements in any federal legislation passed and SEA 2. There are a number of exemptions at both the federal and state level, and each individual's situation would need to be evaluated to determine if any work requirements would apply to them. They would not make anyone available for an on-camera interview. Pam says Jonah could lose his Medicaid benefits at any time. In the end, that could cost him his life.
For a wheelchair person, that's not good at all. And because I'm basically don't have medication, I'm dead in a month. I have a month to live. Yeah, and she has to go work, which won't be worth it because in a month I'll be dead.
Coming up, Indiana's best political team takes on the changes to Medicaid and more decisions that affect your life. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in two members of Indiana's best political team, Republican Allie Bartlett and Democrat Dana Black. Welcome back to you both. So, Allie, let's begin with you. We just heard about the Jacobs family's problems with the FSSA in our last segment, and they're not the only Medicaid users who report long delays. On paper, they would qualify for an exemption to Indiana's new work requirements as well as the proposed federal work requirements. They're worried, though, that their paperwork problems might cost them their coverage. Are those fears valid?
Listen, I know that there are a lot of questions floating around out there right now about work requirements and potential delays and all these things. It's a scary process no matter what, if there are changes or not. I'm not sure, though, that if they are exempted on paper, like you said, that they should be concerned about ultimate loss of coverage. I don't think that administrative delays are necessarily going to, automatically remove anyone from coverage. So I think that everyone needs to just kind of take a step back and realize that while work requirements are going to go into place if the big beautiful bill passes, which we expect it to, that doesn't automatically mean you're just going to get kicked off of coverage. I think that's a huge, misnomer that's out there. There are a lot of exemptions in place, and there are a lot of different ways that people can keep coverage. This is not just going to kick people off of Medicaid and the next day you lose everything. That's just not how it's going to work out.
Dana, given the rapid growth in Medicaid over the past few years, it is the fastest growing part of the state budget, and it's growing at the federal level as well. Shouldn't we prioritize care for those who truly cannot work?
Absolutely, but if you look at this bill overall, this big, I call it the big ugly bill, okay? I can only think of a few pieces of legislation that are more harmful and hurtful to the humans of America. Dred Scott, Chinese Exclusion Act, I don't know, just to name a few. We are literally cutting money from the most vulnerable people in America to give billionaires and millionaires a tax break. I need us to wrap our heads around what we're doing here. We're shifting money from those that really need our help. We're taking them from rural hospitals. We're taking them from Pell Grants for people who want to go to college. This bill, and Medicare and Medicaid is also funds a lot of our rural medical institutions, and also people are on these programs of they're getting Medicaid and Medicare and they don't know that they're getting it because it's listed under a different name, like Indiana HIP or whatever we call it here. It's called a different name. Overall, I'm struggling with the idea that we are taking money from the most vulnerable places in our society to make sure the wealthiest people who will never be able to spend all of that money anyway to get another tax break.
I'll let you respond.
Yeah, I want to respond to one thing on that, because I do think it's a misclassification to say that we are taking money away from the most vulnerable, because what we're doing is actually ensuring that the most vulnerable are receiving the care that they need. We're actually protecting and bolstering Medicaid coverage for people who actually need it, when people who are on it right now that absolutely could be working, able-bodied adults who are not at home taking care of their kids. There are a lot of exemptions, like I said, to these Medicaid work requirements. We're taking coverage from them, which prevents fraud and abuse of our system, so that we can ensure for years to come that people who really need that type of coverage have it. Otherwise, we're going to completely spend down all of the funding for those that need it the most. If people are abusing the system, that's what we're trying to eliminate here.
Allie, come on. If most of our rural institutions rely on that Medicaid money, then how is it that it's somebody being fraudulent? Now, actually, all the people that got counted for fraud have been Republicans who were elected in the, I think about the Florida Senator Scott, when he got busted. But here's the thing. You're cutting the bucket, the big bucket, to give tax breaks to wealthy people. You're taking money from...
We're actually giving tax breaks to all Americans.
But are they going to actually see it? But are they going to see it when they have to pay more for health care?
If this bill didn't pass, Americans would feel a tax increase of up to $2,000 a year immediately.
They're making it more difficult for you to get on the ACA. They're making it difficult for you to have access to health care.
We're making it difficult for people who could be abusing the system to have access to free health care.
We're beginning to get a little low on time. I do want to address another point, and that is, how might federal Medicaid changes affect the decisions that state legislators make around the program going forward? Dan, I'll start with you.
This is absolutely Mike Braun's dream. He wants to gut every social program, in my opinion, that helps the poor, low-wealth people in our state. This is going to be great for him. He's going to, whatever the federal government wants to do, he's going to push it right on down, because he is a Trumpite, and he is going to keep pushing whatever the president wants to do right down to Indiana, including cutting education programs from our publicly funded universities. So Mike Braun's going to be happy with all of this.
And Allie, I will let you respond to that, but also we saw Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina vote no on this bill specifically because of the Medicaid issue, and then announced that he was not going to run for another term after President Trump vowed to back a primary challenger. Has the Republican Party writ large shifted in its attitude toward Medicaid?
No, I don't think that there's necessarily been a shift in our attitude towards Medicaid, but I think what we're seeing is that states who are fiscally responsible and have accounted for these things already, like the state of Indiana, are going to be fine. And that's why we are able to fully support this shift in accountability to make sure that we can protect the most vulnerable who really need these things moving forward. That's the whole point here. We're shifting accountability back to the states where it should be, and a state like Indiana is glad to accept that accountability because we're in a great economic position to do so. We want to support protecting Hoosiers who really need access to these resources and kick off everybody who doesn't and make them go get a job and pay for their own health care just like we all do.
Are we talking about the same Indiana government that mismanaged DCS and FSSA and lost like a couple $1 million and oh, we're short? They're the ones you're talking about? Okay, no, I think Lisa Murkowski in her vote tells everything we needed to know. She was a no on this bill until they said, you know what? We'll take Alaska out of it. They're all exempt. And then she voted yes. She recognized that this bill was harmful to her constituents in Alaska, but she didn't care enough about the rest of America to vote no on this bill.
I think that's completely different. We're mischaracterizing because the state of Indiana has the ability to manage these types of cuts because we're fiscally responsible already.
We've already seen they can't do it.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We're about out of time. Allie and Dan, thank you both for coming in today, and we will be right back.
You weren't supposed to be that good.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. And be sure to check out the All Indiana Politics podcast online at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.